Here is a question that has haunted historians, archaeologists, geneticists, and astronomers for decades, and one that no one has ever been able to fully, satisfyingly answer. How did ancient civilizations, people who had no steel tools, no machinery, no computers, no cranes, build structures so massive, so precise, and so perfectly engineered that modern architects and engineers, with all of today's technology, openly admit they do not know how they were built? We are not talking about small buildings. We are not talking about rough stone walls stacked carelessly by hand. We are talking about the Great Pyramid of Giza, a structure containing over 2 million stone blocks, each one weighing between 2 and 80 tons, fitted together so tightly that you cannot slide a human hair between the joints. A structure aligned to true north with greater accuracy than the Greenwich Observatory in London. A structure built by the official record in just 20 years. We are talking about Puma Punku in Bolivia, sitting nearly 13,000 feet above sea level, where enormous stone blocks weighing hundreds of tons were cut into perfect geometric shapes with angles so sharp and surfaces so smooth that modern engineers believe only diamond-tipped industrial tools could have produced them. And yet the civilization that built this site had no writing, no evidence of a wheel, no known tools capable of this precision anywhere in their archaeological record. We are talking about ancient texts from India, Mesopotamia, Egypt, and China texts thousands of years old that describe flying vehicles in technical detail. Beings from the sky who came down, lived among humans, and taught them everything: agriculture, astronomy, mathematics, architecture, law. So here is the question we are going to sit with tonight. The question that we want you to hold in your mind from this moment until the very end. If everything we know about ancient human capability says these things should have been impossible, then who or what helped them? Stay with us. Because the answer, or at least the closest thing to an answer that serious science and archaeology can currently offer, is waiting for you at the end of this documentary. And it will change the way you think about human history forever. Welcome. You are listening to Sleep Time Narratives, where we explore the world's deepest mysteries, greatest unsolved questions, and most extraordinary stories, topics that deserve more than a headline, more than a 5-minute summary, and more than a dismissive explanation. Tonight's documentary is one of those stories. It is called The Dark Visitors: What If Intelligent Life Once Visited Earth? And over the course of the next several hours, we are going to do something that most people are afraid to do. We are going to take this question completely seriously. Not the way fringe internet forums take it seriously, with certainty, with conspiracy, with claims that go far beyond what the evidence supports. We are going to take it seriously the way a good scientist takes an anomaly seriously, with open eyes, rigorous thinking, and the intellectual honesty to say the words that make some people uncomfortable: we don't know. Because here is the truth. After decades of dismissal, ridicule, and institutional silence, some of the most credentialed scientists and intelligence officials on the planet are now openly saying, there are things happening in our skies and buried in our past that we cannot explain. And they are finally willing to ask out loud whether those unexplained things might point towards something extraordinary. This documentary does not claim to have all the answers. What it has is the questions, the right questions, asked properly, with all of the evidence laid out in front of you. And by the time we reach the end, you will understand why some of the most brilliant minds in human history have spent their lives consumed by this single haunting possibility. We begin at the very beginning. Not with UFOs, not with government secrets, We begin 10,000 years ago in the dirt and stone of the ancient world, because that is where the trail starts. And that trail, once you begin to follow it, never quite lets you go. For most of human history, asking whether intelligent life had ever visited Earth was a career-ending question. Scientists who dared entertain the idea were quietly pushed to the margins. Journals refused to publish papers on it. Universities discouraged serious research into it. And the popular media had done such a thorough job of attaching the idea to tinfoil hats and late-night radio conspiracies that most serious researchers simply stayed away. The message for decades was clear. If you want to be taken seriously, you do not ask that question. And then, in the autumn of 2017, something changed. An object entered our solar system from outside it, the first interstellar object ever observed passing through. Scientists tracked it carefully. They studied its trajectory, its speed, its shape, and what they found made them deeply uncomfortable. The object moved unlike any natural comet or asteroid ever recorded. Its trajectory was wrong. Its acceleration was wrong. When it moved away from the sun, it accelerated in a way that comets do, releasing gas as solar heat vaporizes their ice. But this object showed no outgassing, no tail, no coma, no signs of the natural process that should have explained its behavior. Its shape, as best as astronomers could determine, was long and thin, almost like a flat disk or a shard of dark glass tumbling end over end through the void. They named it Oumuamua, a Hawaiian word meaning messenger from afar, arriving first. Most scientists quickly offered conventional explanations: a strange comet, an unusual asteroid, an object with properties we hadn't encountered before. These explanations were scientifically reasonable. They were also deeply unsatisfying to anyone who looked carefully at the data. One scientist who looked carefully was Avi Loeb. Loeb is not a fringe figure. He is one of the most credentialed astrophysicists alive, the former chair of Harvard's astronomy department, the founding director of Harvard's Black Hole Initiative, a scientist who has published hundreds of peer-reviewed papers and sits on the advisory boards of some of the world's most prestigious scientific institutions. When Avi Loeb speaks about astrophysics, serious people listen. And what Avi Loeb said about Oumuamua was this: he could not rule out that it was artificial, that it might be, and he said this carefully, with full awareness of what it would cost him professionally, a piece of technology created by an intelligent civilization from somewhere else in the galaxy. The scientific community largely reacted with dismissal. Critics called it speculation. Colleagues distanced themselves. But Loeb had said something that could not be unsaid, and he had said it with receipts, with equations and orbital mechanics, and the full weight of his scientific reputation behind it. Suddenly, the question that had been laughed out of serious academic discussion for half a century was sitting in the pages of mainstream scientific publications. And it was sitting there because the data demanded it. Around the same time, something equally startling was happening in Washington. In December 2017, the New York Times published a front-page story revealing the existence of a secret Pentagon program called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. The program had run for years. It had investigated hundreds of encounters between U.S. military personnel and unidentified aerial phenomena, the term the government had quietly begun using in place of the older, more culturally loaded term UFO. Alongside the article, videos were released. 3 of them, filmed from the cockpits of U.S. Navy fighter jets. And in those videos, Objects moved in ways that defied everything we know about aerodynamics, physics, and engineering. They accelerated instantaneously. They turned at angles that would kill a human pilot. They hovered silently at high altitude and then vanished in milliseconds. They had no visible wings, no visible engines, no heat signature, no exhaust. The Navy pilots who encountered these objects were not amateurs. They were among the most experienced aviators in the world, trained to identify aircraft, trained to stay calm under pressure, trained to be skeptical of what they see, and they were shaken. Genuinely, visibly shaken. One pilot described watching an object drop from 80,000 feet to sea level in less than a second. Another described a craft the size of a commercial airliner that simply disappeared while he was looking directly at it. Congress demanded briefings. The Senate Intelligence Committee held closed sessions. Officials who had seen classified versions of the encounters testified that these objects were real, not misidentifications, not glitches, not optical illusions. Real, solid objects performing maneuvers that no known human aircraft, American, Russian, Chinese, or otherwise, could replicate. In 2021, the Pentagon released an official report to Congress documenting 143 military encounters with unidentified aerial phenomena that could not be explained. Not explained as extraterrestrial, but not explained at all. The report used the phrase non-human technology in its internal discussions. It concluded that a significant number of these encounters represented genuine unknowns. And then, in 2023, a former senior intelligence official named David Grush appeared before Congress and testified under oath. He stated that the United States government was in possession of non-human craft. He stated that biological material of non-human origin had been recovered from crash sites. He stated that a secret, multi-decade program existed to reverse engineer retrieve technology, and that this program had been deliberately hidden from congressional oversight. Whether every detail of that testimony is true or false cannot currently be independently verified. What matters is this: a credentialed intelligence officer made these claims under oath before the United States Congress. He did not retract them. He did not face perjury charges. And he was not alone. Multiple other former officials have since made similar statements, in public, with their names attached. The question that was once laughed out of Senate chambers was now being asked inside them. So here is where we stand. In the last decade, the intellectual landscape around this subject has shifted more dramatically than in the previous 50 years combined. We are no longer in the era where asking the question marks you as a lunatic. We are in the era where not asking it marks you as someone who has not been paying attention. And that shift in our present day only makes the ancient past more interesting. Because if we are now in the 21st century, with telescopes and radar and fighter jets and government hearings struggling to explain what is appearing in our skies, what does that mean for everything that came before? What does it mean for the ancient Sumerians who described beings descending from the heavens and teaching them everything they knew about civilization almost overnight? What does it mean for structures built with a precision we cannot replicate? What does it mean for the knowledge that appeared in ancient civilizations thousands of years before it should have been possible? It means we need to look at human history again, this time with different eyes. And that is exactly what we are going to do. Every ancient civilization on Earth, without a single exception, looked up at the sky and believed something extraordinary came from it. Read that. Again, every ancient civilization, every one, not most, not many, all of them, The Sumerians, the Egyptians, the Vedic Indians, the ancient Chinese, the Maya, the Aztecs, the Dogon of West Africa, the Aboriginal Australians, the ancient Greeks, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Hebrews. Every culture that left a written or artistic record of their beliefs across every continent, across every era of recorded human history, independently arrived at the same fundamental idea. Powerful, intelligent beings came from the sky, interacted with humanity, and fundamentally shaped the course of human civilization. This is not a coincidence. Coincidences require a limit. When the same story appears independently in every culture on Earth, separated by thousands of miles of ocean and thousands of years of time, you are no longer looking at coincidence. You are looking at a pattern. And patterns have causes. Let us go through them carefully, not superficially, not to cherry-pick the most dramatic details and ignore the rest. Let us sit with what these ancient people actually wrote and ask ourselves honestly, what were they describing? Begin with Sumer. The Sumerians of ancient Mesopotamia are widely considered the world's first complex civilization. They invented writing. They created the first legal codes. They built the first cities. They developed the first formal mathematics and astronomy. They did all of this around 5,000 years ago in what is now Iraq, on the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. And they left behind something remarkable. Thousands of clay tablets inscribed with their history, their myths, their science, and their accounts of beings they called the Anunnaki. The word Anunnaki translates roughly as those who from heaven came, or those who came down from the sky. And the Sumerians did not describe them the way you describe metaphors or spiritual abstractions. They described them the way you describe historical figures. The Anunnaki had physical bodies. They ate food and required sustenance. They had political structures, hierarchies, rivalries, alliances, and conflicts among themselves. They had individual names, personalities, and recorded histories. The tablets describe in specific detail how the Anunnaki descended to Earth, established their presence among humans, and then deliberately set about teaching human civilization everything it needed to function: agriculture, animal husbandry, mathematics, astronomy, architecture, law, medicine. The Sumerians also described the vehicles the Anunnaki used, the craft they arrived in. In Sumerian, they called them Shem, a word that ancient language scholars have struggled enormously to translate because its meaning seems to shift between rocket, sky vehicle, and name or presence in a way that makes no sense in any purely symbolic context. Scholars who study these texts note that the descriptions sound, at points, almost technical, describing specific components, specific maneuvers, specific sounds. Ancient Sumerian cylinder seals small carved stones used to roll impressions into clay. Like ancient stamps show images of beings with elongated skulls, or with what appear to be helmets on their heads, standing near objects that some researchers describe as rocket-like in appearance. These are not recent interpretations cooked up by alien theory enthusiasts. These are mainstream archaeological objects, housed in museums, studied by academic scholars. The Sumerians knew things they should not have known. Their model of the solar system was accurate. Their astronomical observations, preserved on clay tablets, have been confirmed by modern astronomy. Their calendar was sophisticated beyond what should have been possible for a civilization that supposedly invented writing only a few hundred years earlier. Where did this knowledge come from? The Sumerians had a clear answer. The Anunnaki taught us. Now move east to India. The ancient Sanskrit texts of India, the Vedas, the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, the Puranas, contain something that has fascinated and baffled scholars for generations. Extraordinarily detailed descriptions of flying vehicles. They are called vimanas, and they are not vague. The texts describe multiple types of vimana with different capabilities and different methods of propulsion. Some were described as disc-shaped. Some were described as cigar-shaped. Some could become invisible. Some could operate underwater. Some could travel at speeds described as faster than thought, which, in modern terms, might be an ancient attempt to describe instantaneous or near-instantaneous movement. The Ramayana, one of the two great epics of ancient India, contains extensive descriptions of aerial battles, not battles on the ground, battles in the sky, between craft carrying fighters who used weapons of devastating power, weapons that could destroy entire armies in a single strike, weapons whose effects sound, to modern ears, uncomfortably like descriptions of explosive or energy-based weapons. The Mahabharata goes further. It describes a weapon called the Brahmastra, a weapon that, when used, created a pillar of fire and heat, destroyed everything in its radius, left the land barren for generations, and caused the survivors to lose their hair and develop sores on their skin. A weapon that sounds, to anyone familiar with nuclear physics, like a description of a nuclear detonation and its aftermath. Ancient India was not alone in the ancient world in possessing what appears to be advanced technological knowledge. But the specificity and technical detail of the Sanskrit descriptions of aerial vehicles is without parallel in the ancient world, and these are not obscure fringe texts. The Vedas, the Mahabharata, and the Ramayana are among the most important cultural and spiritual documents in human history, revered, preserved, and studied continuously for thousands of years. Now go west to Egypt. The pyramid texts of ancient Egypt are among the oldest religious writings ever discovered. Inscribed on the walls of the oldest pyramids dating back nearly 4,500 years, they describe the journey of the pharaoh after death, ascending to the sky in a vehicle, joining beings of light who travel between worlds. Egyptologists largely interpret these texts as spiritual metaphor, a description of the soul's journey to the afterlife, and that interpretation is entirely valid within its framework. But some researchers have noted something odd. The texts are not vague the way spiritual metaphors tend to be. They are specific. They include directions. They include what sound like navigational instructions. They include timing. They include descriptions of the vehicle itself, its movement, its capabilities, the sensation of being inside it. You do not typically write navigation instructions for a metaphor. There is also the matter of the Egyptians' cosmological knowledge. They tracked the movements of stars with extraordinary precision. Their calendar was highly accurate. Their knowledge of precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis over a 26,000-year cycle, is encoded in the layout of certain monuments in ways that were only recognized by modern researchers relatively recently. The orientation of the Great Pyramid encodes knowledge of Earth's geography, of the speed of light, and of mathematical constants that should not have been within reach of a Bronze Age civilization. How did they know? The Egyptians, like the Sumerians, had an answer. The gods told us, the beings who came from the sky. But perhaps the most haunting evidence in the ancient record is not in texts, it is in paint on stone. Across the world, in France, Algeria, India, Australia, South America, there are cave paintings dating back thousands and in some cases tens of thousands of years. And scattered among the paintings of animals, hunting scenes, and handprints, there are figures that do not look human. In the cave of Pec Merle in France, painted approximately 25,000 years ago, there are figures that appear to show rounded helmet-like objects around humanoid heads. In Tassili Najer in Algeria, cave art over 6,000 years old shows tall, round-headed figures with no facial features floating slightly above the ground, surrounded by what look like concentric circles or halos of energy. The figures are sometimes called the Great Martians by archaeologists, not because any archaeologist believes they are actually Martians, but because of the distinctly non-human appearance that has struck everyone who has ever seen them. In Charama, India, cave paintings discovered in 2014, dating back at least 10,000 years, appear to show humanoid figures in suits with what look like antennae on their heads, alongside disc-shaped objects in the sky. The local tribal elders who live near these paintings have a name for the beings depicted. They call them the Rohela people, the small ones who came from the sky and took some humans away with them. This is not a recent interpretation. It is an oral tradition passed down for generations. The tribal elders say their ancestors witnessed these beings. You can dismiss one ancient culture's sky beings as metaphor. You can dismiss two as cultural coincidence. You might even be able to dismiss three or four. But when every single ancient civilization on Earth, with no contact with each other, separated by oceans and centuries, independently describes the same basic phenomenon, intelligent beings coming from the sky, interacting with humans, and teaching or transforming human civilization, you have moved beyond the realm of coincidence into something that demands a serious explanation. Because here is the uncomfortable truth that mainstream archaeology has never fully resolved. We do not have a satisfying explanation for why every human culture on Earth independently developed this same belief. The conventional answer is that early humans were trying to explain natural phenomena, lightning, eclipses, storms, by attributing them to powerful beings. This is true for some elements of ancient religion, but it does not explain the specificity. It does not explain the technical detail. It does not explain why the beings described are not forces of nature, but embodied, physical entities with vehicles, with politics, with personal names, with agendas. Lightning does not have a name. Lightning does not eat food. Lightning does not arrive in a craft, teach you mathematics, and then leave. But the Anunnaki did, and so did the Vimana pilots, and so did the beings in the Egyptian sky texts, and so did the entities described in the cave paintings from France to India to Australia. Something was in the ancient sky. Something was remembered. And it was remembered in the only way pre-literate and early literate people could remember it as gods. In 1974, a team of Polish engineers conducted a serious study. They wanted to understand how the ancient Egyptians built the Great Pyramid of Giza. They took the best available historical and archaeological data, applied the most generous possible estimates of ancient manpower, and calculated how long construction would have taken using the tools and techniques believed to have been available at the time. Their conclusion: approximately 1,200 years. The Great Pyramid was built in roughly 20 years. That gap between 1,200 years of required time and 20 years of actual time represents one of the most persistent unsolved problems in all of archaeology. And the more you look at it, the stranger it gets. Let us walk through the numbers carefully, because they matter. The Great Pyramid of Giza contains approximately 2.3 million stone blocks. Each block weighs between 2.5 and 80 tons. The total mass of the structure is estimated at around 6 million tons. If the pyramid was built over 20 years, which is the figure most commonly cited by Egyptologists, then the construction team would have needed to quarry, transport, lift, and precisely position one stone block every 2 minutes and 24 seconds, around the clock, every day, every week, every month, for 2 solid decades. Not every hour, every 2 minutes and 24 seconds. And not just positioned, precisely positioned. The blocks of the Great Pyramid are not stacked roughly, with gaps filled in by mortar. They are fitted together with a precision measured in thousandths of an inch. In many places, you genuinely cannot slide a human hair between 2 adjacent blocks. The casing stones, the outer-facing stones that once covered the entire pyramid in gleaming white limestone, were fitted so tightly and polished so finely that the joints were virtually invisible from a distance. The pyramid is also aligned to true north with an accuracy of 0.05 degrees. For context, the Greenwich Observatory in London, a building constructed in the 17th century specifically to provide the world's most accurate navigational reference point, is aligned to true north with an accuracy of 0.1 degrees. The Great Pyramid, built 4,500 years earlier, without any modern survey equipment, is more accurately aligned, and it sits at the exact center of the Earth's landmass. Not approximately at the center, at the exact center. The meridian that runs through the Great Pyramid divides the Earth's land surface into 2 perfectly equal halves. Either this is the most extraordinary coincidence in the history of architecture, or someone placed it there deliberately with knowledge of Earth's geography that should not have existed in 2500 BCE. None of this has a satisfying conventional explanation. Archaeologists have proposed ramps, but the ramp required to drag the heaviest blocks to the pyramid's upper levels would itself have been an engineering project larger than the pyramid. They have proposed water-lubricated sledges, but the logistics of supplying water at the required rate and scale in the Sahara Desert present their own set of impossible problems. They have proposed internal spiral ramps, a more recent theory that is technically possible but has never been proven and still does not explain the precision of the fitting or the accuracy of the alignment. The Great Pyramid is extraordinary, but it is not alone. 12,000 miles away, on the Bolivian Altiplano, at an altitude of nearly 13,000 feet, so high that the air is thin enough to cause altitude sickness in unacclimatized visitors, there is a site called Pumapunku. Pumapunku is extraordinary for different reasons than the Great Pyramid. The blocks here are not as massive, but the precision of the stonework is, in some ways, even more baffling. The stones at Pumapunku were cut into shapes that modern engineers find almost incomprehensible. Perfect H shapes, with internal angles so sharp and surfaces so flat that they appear to have been machined. Interlocking shapes that fit together with the kind of precision you would expect from computer-guided manufacturing, not hand tools. Holes drilled through solid andesite stone, one of the hardest stones on Earth, with a smoothness and consistency of depth that modern engineers say would require diamond-tipped drill bits or equivalent technology. There are no saw marks, no chisel marks, no evidence of the gradual, incremental work that you would expect from manual cutting. The cuts on some of these stones are so clean that they look, to modern eyes, like they were made by a machine that made one precise pass and stopped. And here is what makes this truly remarkable. The civilization that built Puma Punku had no writing system, no evidence of any wheel, no evidence of bronze or iron tools, no evidence anywhere in their archaeological record of any technology remotely capable of producing what we find at Puma Punku. How do you build a machine-precise site without machines? How do you drill perfect holes in one of the hardest stones on Earth without diamond drill bits? How do you cut surfaces flat to a fraction of a millimeter without measurement instruments? The conventional answer, human ingenuity and patient labor, simply does not hold up when you look at the physical evidence under magnification. Go north and west to Peru, to the city of Cusco, and above it the site of Sacsayhuaman. Sacsayhuaman is an ancient fortress, or perhaps more accurately, an ancient structure of unknown purpose built from enormous blocks of stone, some weighing up to 200 tons. But what makes Sacsayhuaman unique is not simply the size of the blocks, it is how they fit together. The walls of Sacsayhuaman are built in a polygonal style. Each block is a different, irregular shape, and yet every block fits against its neighbors with perfect precision, the irregular shapes interlocking like a three-dimensional puzzle. There is no mortar, none is needed. The stones fit so perfectly that the structure has survived centuries of earthquakes that have flattened the Spanish colonial buildings built nearby from conventional cut stone. No modern architect has been able to fully explain how these walls were planned. To build in polygonal style at this scale, you would need to know, before cutting each block, what shape all of the adjacent blocks would be. A planning challenge of extraordinary complexity, especially without computer modeling. And you would need to transport blocks weighing up to 200 tons to a mountain site and maneuver them into precise positions. The Inca who inherited Sacsayhuaman were clear about one thing: they did not build it. They said it was built by a previous people, a forgotten civilization who possessed a device that softened stone, a device that made stone temporarily workable, like clay. They described watching the builders work with stone the way a potter works with wet earth. Archaeologists classify this as legend, but the physical evidence of the structure itself suggests that whatever process was used to create those interlocking polygonal blocks, it was not conventional chipping and hammering. And then there is Baalbek. In Lebanon, in the Bekaa Valley, there is a site known since Roman times as Heliopolis, the city of the Sunday. The Romans built a magnificent temple complex there, dedicated to Jupiter. But underneath the Roman temple, and predating it by an unknown but substantial period of time, there is something that the Romans themselves marveled at, and apparently chose to build on top of rather than disturb. The foundation stones of the Roman temple at Baalbek include 3 stones known as the trilithon each, one weighing approximately 800 tons. 800 tons, a single stone. 3 of them, fitted together so precisely and positioned so perfectly that they have not shifted in thousands of years. For comparison, the largest stones lifted by modern construction cranes weigh around 3,000 tons in very specialized circumstances. But those cranes are purpose-built machines, operating on flat, stable ground with full logistical support. The stones at Baalbek were not lifted by cranes. The Romans, who were extraordinary engineers, apparently found these stones already in place and simply built on top of them. Nearby, still lying in the quarry where it was cut, is a stone that was never moved. It is called the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, or more technically, the Hajar al-Hibla. It weighs over 1,200 tons, making it the single heaviest stone ever quarried by any human civilization in all of recorded history. It is still lying there, in the quarry, partially cut from the bedrock. It was never moved. No one has ever explained why it is so large. No one has ever explained how the builders intended to move it. And no one has ever identified the civilization that quarried it, because the stonework at the foundation level of Baalbek predates any civilization we have yet identified in the region. Now here is the argument that defenders of conventional archaeology always make at this point, and it is an important argument that deserves to be heard honestly. We underestimate ancient people. This is true. We absolutely do. Ancient humans were not less intelligent than modern humans. They were not primitive in their thinking. They were brilliant, creative, resourceful, and capable of extraordinary things. The argument that ancient people could not have done X because they were too primitive is not only arrogant, it is wrong. Intelligence is not a product of technology. Intelligence is constant across human history, and there is evidence of sophisticated ancient engineering that we understand perfectly well. The Roman aqueducts, the Greek temples, the medieval cathedrals of Europe, all remarkable achievements, all achievable with the tools and labor available at the time. But here is where the argument breaks down. Those structures have evolutionary histories. We can trace the development of Roman engineering from its early experiments to its masterpieces. We can see the trial and error, the prototypes, the gradual improvement. We can find the tools used, the waste material left behind, the evidence of the learning process. The impossible structures Giza, Pumapunku, Sacsayhuaman, Baalbek have none of this. They appear fully formed, with no evolutionary precursors, in civilizations that by every other measure of their archaeological record had only the most basic technology. There is no intermediate stage. There is no practice run. There is no evidence of working up to these structures over generations. They just appear. Something gave these ancient builders a capability they should not have had. The evidence is in the stone itself, in the precision of the cuts, in the accuracy of the alignments, in the scale of the blocks, in the perfection of the fits. Something extraordinary was at work at these sites. The honest answer is that we do not know what it was, and not knowing is where the real inquiry begins. In 1900, a Greek sponge diver named Elias Stadiatis descended into the waters off the coast of the island of Antikythera, looking for sponges on the sea floor. Instead, he found the wreck of an ancient Roman ship. He surfaced and reported what he had seen to his captain. Over the following months, with the help of the Greek government and the Hellenic Navy, divers recovered extraordinary artifacts from the wreck: bronze and marble statues, pottery, jewelry, coins, and one other object, a lump of corroded bronze roughly the size of a shoebox. Badly deteriorated, crusted with marine growth, barely recognizable as anything other than a piece of decayed metal. For years, it sat largely unexamined in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, overshadowed by the more spectacular statues and artwork recovered from the same wreck. It took decades before researchers began to understand what they had actually found. The object, known today as the Antikythera mechanism, is the most sophisticated mechanical device ever recovered from the ancient world. Inside the corroded exterior, X-ray tomography eventually revealed a system of at least 30 interlocking bronze gears of extraordinary precision, with teeth cut so finely that they are smaller than the width of a human hair. The mechanism was designed to calculate and display the movements of the sun and moon, predict solar and lunar eclipses, track the movements of at least 5 planets, display the phase of the moon on any given date, and coordinate with multiple different ancient calendar systems simultaneously. The ship that carried it sank around 70 BCE. The mechanism itself is believed to have been built somewhere between 150 and 100 BCE. The next mechanical device of comparable complexity, with a geared astronomical clock, does not appear in the historical record until the 14th century CE. That is a gap of over 1,400 years. 1,400 years during which the technology to build the Antikythera mechanism existed and then apparently was completely forgotten. Think about what that means. Someone, somewhere, in the ancient Greek world, we do not know who, we do not know where, possessed the knowledge, the materials, and the manufacturing capability to build a device of extraordinary mechanical sophistication. A device that took modern scientists equipped with medical X-ray technology and computer modeling decades to fully understand. And then that knowledge vanished completely for over a millennium. Where did it come from? Where did it go? And why is this story not better known? This is what researchers call the knowledge problem. The knowledge problem is the pattern, and it is a deeply consistent, deeply troubling pattern of ancient civilizations possessing knowledge they should not have had given the timeline of human intellectual development as we understand it. Knowledge that sometimes vanishes completely, only to be painfully rediscovered centuries or millennia later. Knowledge that, in some cases, is still being discovered for the first time by modern science. Let us go through some of the most striking examples. The shape of the Earth. The ancient Egyptians knew the Earth was a sphere. We have clear evidence of this in their astronomical and mathematical records. The ancient Greeks knew it was a sphere. Pythagoras proposed it in the 6th century BCE, and Eratosthenes not only confirmed it, but calculated Earth's circumference in the 3rd century BCE with an accuracy that comes within about 2% of the modern measurement. And then this knowledge was lost. For over 1,000 years, during the European Middle Ages, the educated consensus reverted to a flat or uncertain Earth. The knowledge had to be laboriously rediscovered during the Renaissance. Something that ancient Egyptians and Greeks knew perfectly well had to be reproven to medieval Europeans as if it were a brand new discovery. How does knowledge like that get lost? How does an entire civilization forget that the Earth is round? Heliocentrism, the fact that the Earth orbits the Sunday. Copernicus published his heliocentric model in 1543, and it was considered so revolutionary that it faced serious opposition from the Church and from mainstream European astronomy for over a century. But ancient Indian texts, the Aryabhatiya, written by the mathematician Aryabhata in 499 CE, and earlier Sanskrit texts going back further describe the Earth orbiting the Sunday, not metaphorically, not symbolically. As a physical astronomical fact, roughly 2,000 years before Copernicus was born, ancient Indian astronomers had arrived at the same conclusion. And then there are the Sumerians. The Sumerians had a model of the solar system, not a vague, approximate model, a specific model that included the correct number of planets arranged in the correct order with accurate relative sizes. Their model included planets beyond Saturn, planets that are invisible to the naked eye and were not officially discovered by Western astronomy until the 18th and 19th centuries. Uranus was not formally identified as a planet by Western science until 1781. Neptune was discovered in 1846, And yet the Sumerian solar system model, preserved on clay tablets thousands of years old, includes bodies in the outer solar system in positions that correspond with uncomfortable accuracy to the actual locations of these planets. How did they know? They had no telescopes, no spacecraft, no instruments capable of detecting bodies that far from Earth. And yet their solar system model is more accurate than anything produced by Western astronomy until the age of the telescope. The mathematics of Jupiter's movement. In 2016, historians of science made a discovery that caused genuine shock in their field. They found that ancient Babylonian astronomers, writing on clay tablets dated to between 350 and 50 BCE, had used a mathematical technique to track the position of Jupiter that historians had previously believed was invented in 14th century Europe. The technique involves graphing a planet's velocity over time on a coordinate system, plotting speed against time to calculate distance traveled. It is, in essence, a form of integral calculus. It is the mathematical foundation of how we calculate the movements of all bodies in space. Medieval European mathematicians believed they had invented this approach. The Babylonians had done it over 1,000 years earlier. The clay tablets that prove this had been sitting in museum collections for decades. They simply had not been examined with the right eyes, because no one expected to find 14th century European mathematics on a Babylonian clay tablet from 300 BCE. The binary number system. The binary number system, the mathematical foundation on which all modern computing is built, is typically credited to Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, who developed it formally in the 17th century CE. Binary mathematics, where every value is expressed using only the digits 0 and 1, makes possible every computer, every digital device, every piece of software ever written. Without binary, the modern world as we know it does not exist. Ancient Egyptian mathematics used a form of binary computation in certain calculations. This is not a disputed claim. It is documented in the Rhine mathematical papyrus and other ancient Egyptian mathematical texts. The Egyptians used a process called multiplication by doubling that is functionally a binary operation. The method works because binary mathematics works because it is mathematically valid, and the Egyptians were using it thousands of years before Leibniz described its formal principles. Did the Egyptians understand the full theoretical implications of what they were doing? Possibly not. But they were doing it. They had discovered a property of mathematics that Western civilization would not formally articulate for thousands of years. The Dogon and the Star of Sirius. The Dogon people of Mali, West Africa, are a traditional tribal society living in the same region where their ancestors have lived for thousands of years. They have no telescopes. They have had, for most of their history, no access to Western astronomical data. They are not, by any standard measure, a technologically advanced civilization, and yet they knew about Sirius B. Sirius is the brightest star in the night sky. What makes it astronomically interesting is that it is actually a binary star system. It consists of Sirius A, the visible star, and Sirius B, a white dwarf companion. Sirius B is extremely small and extremely faint. It cannot be seen with the naked eye. Western astronomers suspected its existence from mathematical calculations in the 19th century and were able to observe it directly only in 1862 with a large telescope. The Dogon people knew about Sirius B. They described it in their traditional cosmological teachings. They described it as small, dense, and white, an accurate physical description of a white dwarf star. They knew its orbital period around Sirius A approximately 50 years, and they had ceremonial cycles based on this orbital period. They also described a third body in the Sirius system that modern astronomy has not confirmed but has not ruled out. When Western anthropologists first documented this knowledge in the 1930s and 1940s, they were baffled. When the story became more widely known in the 1970s, it generated enormous controversy. Skeptics argued that the Dogon had been contaminated, that some earlier contact with Western astronomy had introduced this knowledge into their tradition. But the anthropologists who documented the original interviews insisted that the Dogon knowledge predated any plausible contact with Western astronomy, and that the elders described it as ancient as knowledge passed down from their ancestors for generations. The Dogon have a straightforward explanation for where this knowledge came from. Beings from the Sirius system came to Earth long ago and taught their ancestors. They call these beings the Namo fish-like beings, who arrived in a great vessel that spun and descended to Earth, making a tremendous noise and wind. Whether the Dogon account is literally true, it raises a question that has no comfortable conventional answer. How did a pre-literate tribal people in West Africa, with no telescopes and no access to modern astronomical data, acquire accurate knowledge about a star system that Western science, with all of its technology, only confirmed in the 19th century? The Antikythera mechanism is perhaps the most perfect symbol of the knowledge problem in its entirety. Here is a device of extraordinary mechanical sophistication built in the ancient world that demonstrates clearly that someone possessed the engineering knowledge to manufacture precision gears, the astronomical knowledge to program their movements, and the intellectual sophistication to design and build a working analog computer, and then all of that knowledge simply disappeared for 1,400 years. What happened? Where did the knowledge come from in the first place? Who taught the ancient Greeks to build this device, and why did the knowledge die with them? These are questions that conventional history has no fully satisfying answers to. The conventional response is brilliant individuals, knowledge lost through war and political upheaval, rediscovery through independent development are not wrong exactly. These things do happen. Knowledge is fragile. Civilizations do collapse. Libraries burn. But the sheer density of the pattern, the way advanced knowledge appears, clustered around certain ancient civilizations in multiple independent fields simultaneously, and then vanishes, goes beyond what war and fire can explain. It suggests not just that knowledge was lost, but that the source of that knowledge was itself removed. What if some of this knowledge wasn't discovered from scratch? What if some of it was transferred, transmitted, taught by someone or something that possessed it already, and then departed, taking the source of the knowledge with them, leaving behind only the students, and only as much as the students had been able to absorb and preserve? If that were true, then the knowledge problem would not be a mystery at all. It would be exactly what you would expect: isolated pockets of advanced knowledge clustered around the times and places where the contact occurred, gradually degrading over generations as the original source receded further into the past. It would look exactly like what we find. Approximately 300,000 years ago, Homo sapiens appeared on Earth. That sentence sounds like a fact. It sounds settled and certain and clean. But what it conceals, what it papers over, is one of the most fiercely debated, most quietly alarming puzzles in the entire field of evolutionary biology. Because the speed at which modern humans appeared, and the sheer scale of what changed when we did, does not fit comfortably within the normal rules of how evolution works. Let us be precise about what those rules are, because precision matters here. Evolution operates through mutation and natural selection. Genetic changes accumulate slowly over vast spans of time, across thousands of generations, one small variation at a time. The process is incremental, almost by definition. You do not go from one species to a dramatically different one in what amounts, on the geological timescale, to a weekend. Brain size does not triple in a blink. Language does not appear from silence. Abstract symbolic thought does not spontaneously ignite in a species that was, moments before in evolutionary time, making simple stone tools. And yet something very much like that is exactly what the fossil record shows. Paleoanthropologists call it the Great Leap Forward. It refers to a sudden, dramatic, and by evolutionary standards, shockingly rapid explosion in human cognitive capability that appears in the archaeological record approximately 50,000 years ago. Before this moment, simple tools, basic survival behavior, no evidence of art, no evidence of symbolic thought, no evidence of long-distance trade or social networks of any complexity. After this moment, cave paintings of extraordinary beauty and sophistication, carved figurines, musical instruments made from bone, long-distance trade in rare materials, complex burial rituals that imply a belief in an afterlife, and the beginnings of what we would recognize as culture. The transition happened over approximately 50,000 years. In evolutionary terms, 50,000 years is nothing. It is a fraction of the time that it normally takes for a major capability to develop in a species. For comparison, the development of binocular vision in primates took tens of millions of years. The development of bipedal walking in our lineage took millions of years of gradual change. But the cognitive revolution, the leap that made us what we are, happened in what amounts, on the geological clock, to an instant. What flipped the switch? What happened 50,000 years ago that turned a capable but unremarkable primate into the species that would eventually build cities, write symphonies, split the atom, and send probes to the edge of the solar system? Conventional evolutionary biology has answers, incomplete answers, hotly debated answers, but answers. A favorable genetic mutation, a change in climate that created new selective pressures, the development of a slightly more complex larynx that allowed more nuanced speech. These explanations are scientifically reasonable and cannot be dismissed. But they do not tell the whole story, because when geneticists began mapping the human genome in detail, they found something that those conventional explanations do not fully account for. Approximately 145 genes in the human genome have no identifiable precursor in any other primate species. They simply appear in the human lineage with no clear evolutionary pathway that can be traced back through our genetic ancestors. Geneticists call them orphan genes. They are not minor genes. They are not genes that control peripheral or trivial functions. They are genes involved in some of the most distinctly and uniquely human capabilities: abstract reasoning, language production, the specific wiring of the prefrontal cortex, the aspects of brain development that support what we call consciousness. To be clear about what orphan genes mean, in normal evolutionary genetics, when you find a gene in one species, you can trace its ancestry back through related species. You find the precursor gene slightly less developed. You find the gene before that less developed still. You trace the lineage back through evolution like following a family tree. This works for the vast majority of the human genome. Our genes have identifiable relatives in chimpanzee DNA, in gorilla DNA, in the DNA of other primates, and even more distantly related animals. But these 145 genes have no relatives anywhere. They appeared essentially from nowhere. No precursors in any other primate. No evolutionary ancestors that geneticists have been able to identify. They are, in the language of the field, orphans, genes without a traceable family history. Now add to this a second anomaly that is, if anything, even stranger: the human chromosome count. Humans have 46 chromosomes. Every other great ape, chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, orangutans, has 48. This difference has been known for decades, and geneticists have a compelling explanation for it. At some point in human evolutionary history, two chromosomes fused together into one, reducing our count from 48 to 46. The evidence for this fusion is clear and unmistakable. Human chromosome 2 shows all the molecular signatures of exactly this kind of fusion. There are remnant telomeric sequences in the middle of the chromosome where the ends of the two original chromosomes joined, and there is a vestigial centromere, the structural marker that sits at the center of every normal chromosome, now present in an abnormal location. The fusion happened. That is not in dispute. Every human alive carries the evidence of it in every cell of their body. What is not well understood is how it happened so cleanly. Chromosomal fusions in living organisms typically cause serious problems. The resulting offspring frequently have developmental abnormalities. Fertility is often severely reduced. For a fusion like this to successfully propagate through an entire population, to become the genetic standard for every human alive today, it would need to either spread rapidly through a small, founding population, or provide such a strong selective advantage that it outcompeted the 48 chromosome variant within a relatively short time. Neither scenario is impossible. Both are, in conventional evolutionary terms, unlikely enough to require explanation, and the explanation has never been fully provided. And then there is the proposal that came from one of the most unlikely sources imaginable. Francis Crick was not a fringe thinker. He was one of the most celebrated scientists of the 20th century, the co-discoverer, along with James Watson, of the double helix structure of DNA, a discovery for which he received the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1962. He was a rigorous, empirically grounded scientist with no history of credulous speculation, and yet, late in his career, Francis Crick proposed something that startled the scientific world. He and his colleague Leslie Orgel published a paper in the journal Icarus in 1973 proposing what they called directed panspermia, the hypothesis that life on Earth was deliberately seeded here by an advanced extraterrestrial civilization. Crick did not propose this lightly. He proposed it because as he studied the structure and information content of DNA with increasing depth over the course of his career, he became convinced that the spontaneous emergence of DNA from raw chemistry within the time available on early Earth was extraordinarily unlikely. DNA is not a simple molecule. It is one of the most complex information storage systems ever discovered, containing the equivalent of hundreds of volumes of densely packed data in every cell of every living organism on Earth. Its error correction mechanisms, its replication fidelity, its elegance of design. Crick looked at all of this and concluded that it felt, to him, less like something that assembled itself by chance and more like something that was engineered. He was careful to say he could not prove this. He acknowledged the possibility that life on Earth emerged entirely through natural processes, but he thought the probability was low enough that the directed panspermia hypothesis deserved serious scientific consideration. And there is one more piece of this puzzle that makes Crick's intuition harder to dismiss than it might otherwise seem. Life on Earth appeared almost immediately after Earth's surface became hospitable to it. Earth formed approximately 4.5 billion years ago. For several 100 million years after its formation, the surface was too hot, too geologically violent, and too heavily bombarded by incoming asteroids to support any life. And then, almost as soon as those conditions eased, roughly 3.8 billion years ago, life appeared. Not simple chemistry edging toward life. Life. Actual cells. Organisms with functioning metabolisms, genetic material, and the ability to replicate. This speed has always puzzled scientists. The standard model of abiogenesis, the emergence of life from non-living chemistry, requires a vast number of extraordinarily improbable chemical reactions to occur in the right sequence under the right conditions. The fact that this process apparently completed itself almost instantaneously in geological terms on early Earth either means that life emerges easily under the right conditions, which would suggest the universe is teeming with it, or that it did not emerge here from scratch at all. Either interpretation has profound implications. If life emerges easily, then the galaxy almost certainly contains other living worlds, and the probability of intelligent civilizations visiting Earth increases dramatically. And if life arrived here already assembled, if the seeds of terrestrial biology were delivered to this planet from somewhere else, then everything we think we know about the origin of life on Earth needs to be re-examined. The genetics does not prove extraterrestrial contact. What it does is reveal gaps, real, documented, scientifically acknowledged gaps in our understanding of how we came to be what we are, gaps that the standard model of evolution has not fully filled. And those gaps sit in precisely the places where, if something had intervened, you would expect to find them. The orphan genes that gave us language and abstract thought. The chromosome fusion that no one fully understands, the cognitive explosion that happened too fast, the origin of life itself, arriving almost before the Earth had finished cooling. What are we really? That question is no longer purely philosophical. It has a genetic dimension, and the genome, examined honestly, does not give a clean answer. Let us step back from Earth entirely for a moment. Let us pull back from the cave paintings and the ancient texts and the orphan genes and the impossible pyramids, and let us look at the largest possible picture. Let us look at the universe itself, and its age, its scale, its contents, and ask the simplest possible version of the question, mathematically, statistically, by the sheer brute force of numbers. Is it likely that we are alone? The answer, when you actually run the numbers, is so unambiguous that it should keep you awake at night. Begin with scale. The observable universe, the portion of the universe that light has had time to reach us from since the Big Bang, contains an estimated 2 trillion galaxies. Not 2 billion, 2 trillion. Each of those galaxies contains, on average, roughly 100 billion stars. Many of those stars have planetary systems. Scientists working with data from the Kepler Space Telescope have estimated that there are somewhere in the range of 300 sextillion stars in the observable universe. That is the number 3 followed by 23 zeros. Written out, it looks like this: 300,000, 1,000. Numbers at this scale are essentially meaningless to the human brain. We have no visceral sense of what 300 sextillion of anything looks like. So let us try to make it concrete. If you counted 1 star per second without stopping, without sleeping, it would take you approximately 9.5 trillion years to count them all. The universe itself is only 13.8 billion years old. You would need roughly 700 times the current age of the universe just to count the stars. Now apply the question of habitability to those numbers. The Kepler Space Telescope, which spent years observing a small patch of sky and cataloging the planets it found around nearby stars, produced a finding that has become one of the most cited statistics in modern astronomy. Approximately 20% of Sun-like stars have at least one planet in their habitable zone, the region around a star where liquid water can exist on a planet's surface. Liquid water is, as far as we currently know, a prerequisite for life as we understand it. 20% of all Sun-like stars in our galaxy alone, the Milky Way with its 100 to 400 billion stars, That translates to approximately 40 billion potentially habitable Earth-like planets. 40 billion in one galaxy, out of 2 trillion. But here is where the mathematics becomes genuinely staggering. The universe is 13.8 billion years old. Earth is only 40.5 billion years old. This means that for over 9 billion years before our planet even existed, 9 billion years during which stars were burning and planetary systems were forming, and the conditions for life were present in countless solar systems across countless galaxies. The universe was available for life to emerge, develop, and evolve. 9 billion years is almost incomprehensible. Modern humans, Homo sapiens in our current form, have existed for perhaps 300,000 years. Written civilization is about 5,000 years old. We have had the technology to communicate by radio for approximately 150 years. In 9 billion years, a civilization starting from the same point as us could have reached our current technological level and then advanced beyond it for 8.9 billion more years. Think about what humanity might look like 8.9 billion years from now. If we survive that long, which is far from guaranteed as we will discuss, what would we be capable of? What would our technology look like? What would be possible? We cannot answer that question because the gap is too vast. 8.9 billion years of technological advancement is so far beyond our current capabilities that we have no meaningful way to imagine what it would produce. We would be to that civilization what bacteria are to a neurosurgeon. And if even a tiny fraction of the civilizations that could have developed in that 9 billion year window survive long enough to develop interstellar travel, even just 1 in a billion, the mathematics suggests that the galaxy should be, by now, teeming with spacefaring civilizations, some of them potentially billions of years more advanced than we are. This is the setup for what physicist Enrico Fermi identified in 1950 as the most haunting question in all of science. Fermi was sitting in a cafeteria at Los Alamos National Laboratory eating lunch with colleagues when the conversation turned to the recent proliferation of UFO reports in popular media. Fermi, who had a habit of reducing complex problems to their essential numerical core, looked at his colleagues and asked a question so simple it was almost comic. If the universe is this old, this large, and this full of potentially habitable worlds, where is everybody? Where are the signals? Where are the alien ships? Where are the megastructures visible from light years away that an advanced civilization would inevitably build? Where is the evidence of even a single other intelligent species anywhere in the cosmos? We have been listening. We have been looking. We have pointed radio telescopes at the sky for decades, scanning billions of frequencies for any signal of artificial origin. We have built space telescopes capable of detecting the atmospheric chemistry of planets in other solar systems. We have sent probes to every planet in our solar system and beyond, and the silence has been deafening. No signals, no megastructures, no visitors, nothing. This discrepancy between the mathematical certainty that other civilizations should exist and the complete absence of any evidence that they do is called the Fermi paradox. And the proposed solutions to it are, without exception, unsettling. The first possibility, civilizations inevitably destroy themselves. Every sufficiently advanced civilization eventually develops the technology to destroy itself. Nuclear weapons, engineered pandemics, artificial intelligence that escapes control, environmental collapse. And almost every civilization makes the choice, or has the accident, that ends it before it can reach the stars. Under this explanation, the universe is littered with the ruins of civilizations that almost made it. We are either one of the first, or we are next. The second possibility, interstellar travel, is simply impossible. The distances between stars are so vast that no civilization, no matter how advanced, can cross them in any practical time frame. The nearest star to our Sun is Proxima Centauri, approximately 4.2 light-years away. Traveling at the speed of our fastest current spacecraft, the journey would take roughly 75,000 years. Even at 10% of the speed of light, a velocity far beyond our current capability, the trip would take 42 years. The galaxy is 100,000 light-years across. Under this explanation, civilizations are confined to their home solar systems forever, separated by distances that make contact essentially impossible. The third possibility, we are genuinely alone. Perhaps the emergence of intelligent life is so extraordinarily improbable, requiring such a specific, unlikely chain of events, that it has only happened once in the observable universe. We are the cosmic accident. We are the anomaly. The silence is not evidence that civilizations destroy themselves or cannot travel. It is evidence that we are it, the only thinking thing in 13.8 billion years of cosmic history. This possibility, called the rare earth hypothesis by its proponents, is perhaps the most philosophically vertiginous of all. The idea that in a universe of 300 sextillion stars, we are the only ones looking up and wondering is both terrifying and, in a strange way, magnificent. And then there's the fourth possibility, the one this documentary has been building toward. Perhaps the silence is not silence. Perhaps the absence of signals and megastructures and obvious contact is not evidence of absence. Perhaps civilizations at a certain level of advancement do not broadcast themselves loudly across the electromagnetic spectrum. Perhaps interstellar travel, for a sufficiently advanced civilization, is not the impossible journey it seems to us. Perhaps the timescales involved in galactic colonization or contact are so vast that a civilization could have visited Earth and departed before we had any way to recognize and record the encounter in terms that would survive and be legible to our future scientific understanding. Perhaps they came long before we had radio telescopes or peer-reviewed journals or government bodies capable of investigating and confirming their presence. Perhaps they came when we were young, when we were just learning to plant crops and look up at the night sky with something more than animal fear. And perhaps we remembered them. Perhaps the gods of every ancient culture on Earth were not metaphors. Perhaps they were memories, imperfect memories, distorted by time and the limits of pre-scientific language, encoded in myth and ritual and stone monuments, because those were the only recording technologies available, but memories nonetheless, of something that was real. The mathematics does not prove this, but the mathematics makes it plausible in a way that nothing else does. If the universe is this old, this large, and this full of potentially habitable worlds, and if life and intelligence are not vanishingly rare, then the probability that an advanced civilization visited Earth at some point in its 4.5 billion year history is not small. It is in fact difficult to argue that the probability is small. We are not looking for a needle in a haystack. We are looking at a haystack so large that, if needles exist at all, several of them almost certainly landed here. The question is only whether we have been looking in the right places. There's a plateau in southern Peru called Nazca. It is a high, arid, windless plain, baked by the sun and scoured by centuries of absolute dryness. Almost nothing grows there. Almost nothing changes there. The conditions are so stable, so perfectly preserved, that objects placed on its surface thousands of years ago remain almost exactly as they were left. And on this plateau, covering an area of roughly 19 square miles, there are drawings, hundreds of them, thousands if you count all of the lines, geometric shapes, perfect trapezoids, spirals, rectangles, etched into the surface with mathematical precision, straight lines stretching for miles across terrain that is not flat, deviating from perfectly straight by less than a degree over their entire length, and animals. A hummingbird with wings outstretched, a condor in flight, a spider of extraordinary detail, a monkey with a curling tail, a whale, a pelican, a pair of hands, drawn on a scale so enormous that they cannot be seen or understood as images from the ground. They are only visible, only legible as the animals and shapes they are, from the air. From several hundred feet above the desert floor, they are breathtaking. From the ground, they are just lines. The Nazca lines were created by the Nazca culture, a pre-Incan people who inhabited this region of Peru between roughly 500 BCE and 500 CE. The technique was simple in concept, demanding in execution. Workers removed the reddish-brown iron oxide-coated surface pebbles and piled them along the edges of the lines, revealing the pale yellowish-gray ground beneath. The contrast between the dark surface and the light subsurface creates the visible lines. In the dry, windless climate of the Nazca Desert, one of the driest places on Earth, these lines have been preserved almost perfectly for over 2,000 years. This much is established fact, not contested by anyone. The mystery is not how the lines were made in a technical sense. The mystery is why. Begin with the most obvious problem, the one that no official explanation has ever fully resolved. These images are designed to be seen from the air. The Nazca people had no aircraft. They had no hot air balloons. They had no way, as far as any archaeologist has ever been able to establish, to achieve the altitude from which these images are visible and comprehensible. The hummingbird is 93 meters long. The condor has a wingspan of over 130 meters. The monkey is 55 meters from hand to tail. At ground level, standing anywhere on the Nazca Plain, these are not hummingbirds and condors and monkeys. They are meaningless lines going in unexplained directions. So here's the question, stated as plainly as possible: why would a culture with no means of aerial observation design images that are only meaningful from the air? Why would you spend enormous time and labor creating something that you and every member of your community would never be able to see as the thing it is? The official archaeological explanations are not without merit, and they deserve to be heard carefully. The most widely accepted interpretation is that the Nazca lines were ritual pathways, that the act of walking the lines was itself the purpose, not observing them from above. Under this interpretation, the images are offerings to sky gods, created for divine eyes to observe from the heavens, not human eyes. The Nazca were, in this reading, making art for an audience they believed existed above them. A second mainstream interpretation holds that some of the lines function as astronomical markers, pointing towards sunrise or sunset on significant dates, tracking the movement of constellations that had ritual meaning in Nazca cosmology. Several researchers have identified genuine astronomical alignments in certain lines, though the evidence is not consistent enough across the entire site to make this a complete explanation. A third explanation, proposed more recently, is that the lines functioned as paths for ritual processions connected to water worship, that the Nazca people walked them in ceremonies intended to appeal to the gods for rain in a region chronically vulnerable to drought. All of these explanations contain elements of truth. None of them fully resolves the central problem. If the lines were ritual pathways for walking, why design them as specific animals visible only from above? You do not need to create a perfectly proportioned 93-meter hummingbird to have a path to walk. Any path would serve the ritual function. The specific recognizable imagery is an additional element that the path-walking explanation does not account for. If the lines were offerings to sky gods, images created for divine observation, then that interpretation actually supports rather than dismisses the alternative hypothesis, because it means the Nazca people believed, with enough conviction to invest enormous collective labor in the project, that there were beings above them capable of looking down and seeing what was drawn on the desert floor. That is either a purely religious belief expressed in unusually elaborate physical form, or it is a cultural memory of beings who had actually done exactly that, observed from above. Now let us look at the engineering problem. Because even if we accept that the Nazca people had a compelling reason to create these images, the question of how they did so with such extraordinary precision remains deeply challenging. The long straight lines at Nazca, some of them extending over 30 miles, deviate from perfectly straight by less than a degree over their entire length, across terrain that rises and falls, that is cut by gullies and crossed by low hills. Modern surveyors who have studied these lines express genuine astonishment at this precision. To maintain a straight line over 30 miles of broken terrain, even with modern surveying equipment, is not trivial. To do it with sticks and rope, as the conventional explanation requires, has been tested by researchers who found it nearly impossible to replicate at the scale and over the distances involved. Some researchers have proposed that the Nazca used a grid system, drawing small designs to scale on a planning surface and then projecting them outward using a system of measured ropes. This is technically possible for simple geometric shapes. It becomes extremely difficult for the organic curves of the animal figures, which require maintaining proportional relationships across enormous distances on terrain that is not flat and not uniform. There have also been serious proposals that the Nazca had some form of primitive aviation hot air balloons made from local materials. The materials are available. The technology is within reach of what the Nazca possessed. And there is a tantalizing piece of evidence. In the soil at Nazca, researchers have found carbon deposits in patterns consistent with a fire pit, in a location that would make sense as a balloon launching site. One researcher named Jim Woodman constructed a balloon using only materials and techniques available to the Nazca and successfully flew it over the plain. But there is no direct evidence, no images, no descriptions in surviving texts, no physical remnants of Nazca balloon technology. The balloon hypothesis remains an elegant possibility, not a confirmed fact. And here is the alternative that some serious researchers have put forward, carefully, with full awareness of how it sounds. What if the Nazca lines were not made for aerial observation by the Nazca themselves? What if they were made as signals, as markers, as communications, as what we would today call a landing beacon for something or someone that was already arriving from above? The logic of this hypothesis is not as bizarre as it initially sounds. Consider the behavior of indigenous peoples in other parts of the world who have had contact with technologically advanced outsiders. The cargo cults of Melanesia, Pacific Island cultures that encountered Western aircraft and military bases during World War II responded by building elaborate imitations of landing strips and aircraft on their islands, complete with wooden control towers and effigies of soldiers, in the hope of calling the aircraft back. They had seen these objects come from the sky, deliver extraordinary goods, and depart. They wanted them to return, and they communicated that desire in the only way available to them, by creating on the ground the patterns they had seen from the sky. The parallel is not proof, but it is not nothing. If the Nazca people or their cultural predecessors had experienced aerial visitors, their natural response within their cosmological framework would be exactly what we see, creating on the ground, on a scale large enough to be seen from above, the images and markings that they hoped would communicate to those visitors. The lines as invitation, the lines as we are here, we remember you, please return. There is one final element of the Nazca mystery that rarely gets the attention it deserves. The Nazca lines are not the only examples of this phenomenon. In Chile's Atacama Desert, another of the world's driest places, not far from Nazca, there is a geoglyph called the Atacama Giant. It is a human figure roughly 119 meters tall, drawn on a hillside in a style similar to the Nazca animal figures. It depicts a humanoid being with what appear to be large, round, helmet-like protrusions from its head, and what some researchers describe as antennae or devices extending upward. Local indigenous traditions identify this figure as a sky being, an entity from above. In the desert regions of Kazakhstan, Aerial surveys have revealed enormous geometric earthworks covering thousands of square kilometers, swastikas, crosses, squares, rings, constructed from piled earth, invisible from the ground, only visible from the air. They predate the Nazca lines. They are older, and they cover an area so vast that they could not have been planned without some form of aerial perspective. From Peru to Chile to Kazakhstan, and in other locations across the globe, ancient people drew enormous things on the earth that were only meaningful from above. They did this independently in different cultures at different times with no known connection to one another. The question that persists is simple and unavoidable. Who were they drawing for? Every now and then, someone digging in the earth finds something that should not be there. Not something unusual or interesting or historically significant in the conventional sense, a lost coin, a buried pot, an ancient tool, something that genuinely should not exist, given everything we know about the timeline of human technological development and the age of the geological layers in which it was found. Objects made of materials and with a precision that their context makes impossible. Objects from the wrong time. Objects from a history that, if they are what they appear to be, we do not yet know. These objects have a name in archaeology. They are called out-of-place artifacts, or oparts, a term coined by the writer and researcher Evan Sanderson in the 1960s. The scientific establishment tends to treat them with deep skepticism, and for good reason. Archaeology is riddled with misidentified objects, misdated geological layers, and deliberate hoaxes. Any individual opart, examined in isolation, can almost always be explained away as a mistake or a fraud. But there is a list of them, a long, documented, peer-reviewed, in many cases list of objects that do not fit. And when you read through the list carefully, several items stand out. Not because they are impossible to explain individually, but because of what they collectively suggest. Begin in Austria in 1901. A worker in a coal mine near the town of Wolfsegg discovered a small metallic object embedded inside a seam of coal. He brought it to the surface, and it was eventually examined by scientists at the Salzburg Museum. The object, known as the Salzburg cube or the Wolfsegg iron, is made of iron and carbon steel. It is roughly rectangular with 4 flat sides, 2 convex rounded sides, and a deep, precise groove machined around its equator. It is symmetrical. It looks machined. It has been analyzed by multiple researchers and by its physical characteristics appears to be an intentionally manufactured object. The coal seam in which it was found has been dated to the Tertiary period, approximately 60 million years old. 60 million years ago, there were no humans. There were no hominids. Our primate ancestors at that point were small, tree-dwelling creatures with brains roughly the size of a walnut. The first mammals capable of using stone tools would not appear for another 55 million years. And yet a machined metal object was found inside a 60 million year old coal seam. The object is real. It is housed in a museum. It has been physically examined. The explanations offered, that it fell into a crack in the coal from above, that it is a natural mineral concretion that coincidentally resembles a machined object, have been considered by researchers who found them inadequate. The groove around the equator is too regular. The symmetry is too precise. The material is too clearly a manufactured metal alloy. No one has satisfactorily explained the Wolfsegg iron. Moved to Scotland in 1844. A group of workers quarrying sandstone near Kingoody, Scotland, found a nail embedded inside a block of stone, not lying near the surface, not in a crack or a vein that could have allowed something to seep in from outside. Embedded inside the solid stone, in a position that indicated it had been there since the stone was formed, the block in which the nail was found was part of a geological formation estimated to be between 360 and 408 million years old. The Devonian period. when the most complex life on Earth was primitive fish and early amphibians just beginning to drag themselves onto land, more than 350 million years before the first human being, a nail, a manufactured iron nail, inside 400-million-year-old stone. The standard explanation is contamination, that the nail fell into a crack in relatively recent times and became embedded in a way that made it appear to be part of the original stone. The objects are known as the Klerksdorp spheres. Hundreds of them have been found. They are harder than the pyrophyllite in which they are embedded, which means they did not form from the surrounding mineral. The pyrophyllite deposits in which they are found have been dated to the Precambrian era, approximately 2.8 billion years old. 2.8 billion years ago, Earth had no complex life of any kind. It was a world of single-celled microorganisms. Nothing with the cognitive capacity to manufacture an object existed anywhere on Earth. Nothing with the cognitive capacity to manufacture an object had ever existed anywhere on Earth. Geologists who have studied the Klerksdorp spheres argue that they are natural concretions, objects that form when minerals precipitate around a central nucleus in sedimentary or metamorphic rock. This process does produce spherical shapes. It does not typically produce perfectly regular, evenly spaced parallel grooves around an equator. The grooves are the problem. Natural concretions do not produce parallel grooves of this regularity. The geometry is wrong for a natural process. The spheres have been studied, debated, and never fully explained. Baghdad, Iraq. Objects known as the Baghdad batteries. In the 1930s, German archaeologist Wilhelm Koenig, working at the National Museum of Iraq, examined a collection of clay jars that had been found near Baghdad. They were dated to the Parthian period, roughly 250 BCE, and when Koenig looked at their contents carefully, he recognized something extraordinary. Each jar contained a copper cylinder, inside which was an iron rod, held in place by an asphalt stopper. This configuration, copper, iron, and an acid-resistant container, is a functioning galvanic cell. A battery. If you filled a jar with an acidic liquid, vinegar, lemon juice, grape juice, all of which were available in ancient Mesopotamia, it generates a small but measurable electric current. Koenig recognized this immediately because it was not a new design. It was the same basic design as the voltaic pile, the first modern battery invented by Alessandro Volta in 1800, the design that Volta believed he had invented from scratch, the design that launched the entire field of electrical engineering. The same fundamental configuration in a 2,000-year-old clay jar sitting in an Iraqi museum. Researchers have built replicas of the Baghdad batteries and tested them. They work, they generate current, they are functional electric batteries. What were they used for? The most mundane explanation is electroplating, using electric current to deposit a thin layer of metal onto an object, a technique used in jewelry making. And there is some evidence that electroplated objects existed in the ancient Middle East, though the connection to the Baghdad batteries has never been definitively established. Other proposed uses include acupuncture-like pain relief using mild electric current, or simply the production of a tingling sensation for religious rituals. The point is not that the Baghdad batteries are inexplicable in isolation. The point is that they demonstrate something that has implications reaching far beyond any single object. The knowledge of basic electrical generation existed 2,000 years before the civilization that claimed to discover it. That knowledge was lost, and then it was rediscovered, as if for the first time, by scientists who had no idea it had already been found. Now step back and look at the full picture. The Wolf's Egg iron in its 60-million-year-old coal, the nail in its 400-million-year-old stone, the London artifact with its impossibly pure iron, the Klerksdorp spheres with their inexplicable parallel grooves in 2.8 billion-year-old rock. The Baghdad batteries and their 2,000-year head start on Alessandro Volta. Each of these objects considered alone can be met with a skeptical explanation: contamination, misidentification, natural processes that we do not yet fully understand. These are legitimate scientific responses and they should not be dismissed, but collectively, these objects form part of a larger pattern, the same pattern we have been tracing throughout this entire documentary: advanced knowledge appearing before it should, manufactured precision in contexts that conventional history says should not contain it, evidence of capabilities that our timeline of human development says should not have existed. A mosaic, as we said earlier, only makes sense when you step back far enough to see the whole picture. Each individual tile looks like nothing, but from the right distance, the image emerges. The image that is emerging here from all of these pieces laid together is of a history that does not match the history we have been taught, a history that is older than we thought, stranger than we thought, and far more surprising. The question is not whether each individual anomaly can be explained away. The question is why there are so many of them. Why do they keep appearing? Why, in every era and every corner of the archaeological record, do we keep finding things that should not be there? If there is a simple answer to that question, it has been waiting to be found for a very long time. Everything we have examined so far is ancient: the pyramids, the cave paintings, the clay tablets, the orphan genes, the out-of-place artifacts. These are the traces of things that happened thousands or millions or billions of years ago. They are compelling. They are mysterious, but they are also distant, separated from us by so much time that there is always room for doubt, always room to say, we are misinterpreting the evidence. We are seeing patterns where there are none. The ancient world is simply strange, and strangeness does not require an extraordinary explanation. But now we move to the present, to the last 80 years of documented human history, to incidents observed by trained military personnel with sophisticated instruments, to events recorded on film, tracked by radar, documented in classified government files, and eventually declassified and placed in the public record, to the moment when this subject stopped being a fringe curiosity and became an active question in the halls of the world's most powerful governments. The official story for most of the 20th century was simple: there was nothing to see. Governments around the world, the United States, the United Kingdom, France, the Soviet Union, and others, all maintained official public positions that unidentified aerial phenomena had mundane explanations. Weather balloons, atmospheric inversions causing radar anomalies, optical illusions, stress-related misperceptions by otherwise competent observers. The message was consistent and clear. The people reporting these things were mistaken. There was no genuine mystery. There was nothing to investigate. This position was not entirely dishonest. Many, perhaps most, reported sightings do have mundane explanations. The history of UAP investigation genuinely is littered with cases that turned out to be misidentified conventional aircraft, natural atmospheric phenomena, or in some cases, deliberate hoaxes. Healthy skepticism is appropriate. Pattern matching in ambiguous perceptual conditions is a known feature of human psychology. All of this is true, but the official position was also not entirely honest. Because mixed into the mundane cases, the weather balloons and the optical illusions and the stress-induced misperceptions, there was a residual category, a category of cases that survived the most rigorous investigation. Cases involving multiple independent witnesses, cases with simultaneous radar confirmation of visual observations, cases involving trained military pilots with decades of experience and no obvious motive for fabrication, cases where the objects observed performed maneuvers that no known aircraft, American, Soviet, or otherwise, could replicate, and governments knew about this residual category. They had been investigating it quietly and systematically for decades, and they had been covering it up. not necessarily because they knew the answer, but because they were afraid of what they did not know. Let us go through what we now know chronologically. In 1927, an incident occurred near Roswell, New Mexico, that became one of the most famous and most contested events in the history of this subject. The initial U.S. Army Air Force press release stated that a flying disc had been recovered. That press release was issued on July 8, 1947. Within 24 hours, it was retracted and replaced with an explanation that the recovered material was a weather balloon. The reversal was so rapid and so awkward that it generated immediate skepticism among journalists and the public. Decades of subsequent investigation, Freedom of Information Act requests, and testimony from individuals who claimed direct knowledge produced a picture that remains genuinely unclear. Some credible witnesses have described non-human material and non-human bodies recovered from the crash site. Official investigations have offered alternative explanations, classified military balloon programs, crash test dummies mistaken for alien bodies. None of the explanations has been entirely satisfying to serious researchers on any side of the debate. What Roswell established, regardless of what actually crashed in that desert in July 9, 2047, was a template for how the United States government would handle this subject for the next 7 decades, acknowledge nothing, explain everything as something mundane, and ensure that anyone who pressed too hard found their access to information quietly closed off. In the United Kingdom, a different but parallel story was unfolding. The British Ministry of Defence ran an official investigation into unidentified aerial phenomena for decades, a program that only became public knowledge when its files were declassified and released to the National Archives beginning in 2008. What those files contained surprised many people who expected nothing but weather balloons and optical illusions. The MOD files document hundreds of cases involving credible witnesses, military pilots, air traffic controllers, police officers, Coast Guard personnel, describing objects that behaved in ways no known aircraft could. Objects that accelerated from a standing hover to supersonic speed instantaneously, with no visible propulsion and no sonic boom. Objects that made right-angle turns at high velocity, maneuvers that would crush any human pilot under forces measured in hundreds of G. Objects that appeared on radar were tracked and then simply vanished from radar coverage while still visible to observers on the ground. The MOD, to its credit, did not simply dismiss these reports. It investigated them, and in a significant number of cases, its own investigation concluded unexplained. No conventional explanation adequate to account for what was observed. In France, the investigation went further still. In 1999, a group of senior French military officers, aerospace engineers, and intelligence officials produced a document known as the COMETA report, an acronym for Comité d'études approfondies, the Study Committee for In-Depth Studies. The COMETA report was not a fringe publication. It was prepared by people with impeccable credentials in the French defense establishment. Its authors included generals, aerospace engineers, a former director of the French Space Agency, and senior intelligence officials. The report examined a large number of documented UAP cases in detail. Its conclusions were carefully worded but unambiguous in their direction. A small but significant percentage of the cases examined, cases that had survived rigorous investigation by qualified personnel, remained completely unexplained by any conventional hypothesis. The report explicitly stated that the extraterrestrial hypothesis, the possibility that some observed phenomena originated with non-human intelligence from beyond Earth, could not be ruled out and deserved serious scientific attention. This was not a report filed in a drawer and forgotten. It was distributed to senior members of the French government. It was made available to the scientific community. It was a formal, credentialed official document from a NATO ally explicitly stating that some aerial phenomena might be of extraterrestrial origin. It received almost no coverage in the American or British mainstream press, and then came 2017. In December 2017, the New York Times published an investigation that cracked the official American wall of denial in a way it had never been cracked before. The article revealed the existence of a classified Pentagon program called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, AETIP, that had been running since at least 2007, funded by millions of dollars of government money, investigating UAP encounters involving United States military personnel. The article was accompanied by 3 videos. They had been filmed by the targeting cameras of U.S. Navy fighter jets, the most sophisticated airborne optical and electronic systems ever built. The pilots operating those systems were among the best-trained aviators in the world. In the videos, you can see objects, solid objects, moving through the air, moving in ways that nothing we know how to build can move. In one video, known as the tic-tac footage after the shape of the object, a white oblong craft is observed hovering at altitude, and then, as the Navy aircraft approaches, it accelerates away at a speed that leaves the pursuing jet completely behind in seconds. The object has no visible wings, no visible engines, no exhaust, no heat signature. It makes no sonic boom. It just goes. Commander David Fravor, the senior Navy pilot who led the intercept of the tic-tac object, has given extensive public interviews about what he observed. He is not a credulous person. He is a career Navy aviator with decades of experience, trained to identify every type of aircraft in current operation. And he has said clearly and repeatedly that he has no explanation for what he saw, that it moved unlike anything he has ever seen or heard of, that it seemed to react to his aircraft's approach, as if aware of being observed, and that whatever it was not any technology he recognized as American, Russian, Chinese, or the product of any other nation he was aware of. The other 2 videos, known as Gimbal and Goffist, show similar objects displaying similar impossible kinematics. In the gimbal footage, an object rotates against the direction of travel with no aerodynamic explanation. In Go Fast, an object moves at extraordinary speed just above the ocean surface, with no visible propulsion and no wake from any kind of water interaction. These videos were not ambiguous smartphone footage of lights in the night sky. They were high-resolution recordings for military targeting systems, simultaneously confirmed by multiple radar systems observed by multiple trained crew members. And the Pentagon confirmed they were genuine, not disputed, not misidentified, genuine unresolved phenomena. The congressional response was unlike anything that had occurred in this subject's modern history. The Senate Intelligence Committee demanded classified briefings. The Armed Services Committee held hearings. Senior intelligence officials testified under oath before Congress that the objects in these videos were real, that they were not American technology, that they were not, to the best of anyone's knowledge, the technology of any foreign power, that they represented genuine unknowns. In 2021, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released an unclassified report on UAP to Congress. The report documented 143 incidents involving U.S. military personnel between 2004 and 2021, for which no explanation had been identified. Not explained as extraterrestrial, not explained at all. The report acknowledged 5 possible categories of explanation: airborne clutter, natural atmospheric phenomena, U.S. government or industry technology, foreign adversary technology, and a 5th category described as other, and concluded that for the vast majority of the documented cases, none of the first 4 categories was adequate. The 5th category, other. And then came the testimony that no one in the mainstream establishment quite knew how to handle. In July 2023, a man named David Grush sat before a House Oversight Subcommittee and testified under oath. Grush was not a conspiracy theorist. He was a former Air Force intelligence officer and a former representative to the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, the official Pentagon body created to investigate UAP. He had a security clearance, he had worked within the classified UAP investigation infrastructure, and he was testifying under oath before Congress. What he said was this: the United States government is in possession of non-human craft. Not possible non-human craft. Not craft that might possibly be of non-human origin. Non-human craft. He said that biological material of non-human origin had been recovered from crash sites. He said that a secret multi-decade program existed to reverse engineer this retrieved technology, and that this program had been deliberately concealed from congressional oversight, possibly illegally. He named this as a matter of national security that members of Congress had a right and a responsibility to investigate. His testimony was corroborated by several other witnesses. Former Navy pilot Ryan Graves testified that UAP encounters were far more common among military personnel than the public was aware of, and that there was enormous institutional pressure not to report them. Retired Navy pilot David Fravor, the Tic Tac pilot, testified again about his 2004 encounter. Gersh was not charged with perjury. No official body disputed his security credentials. The government did not release a statement calling him mistaken or confused. It offered essentially no response at all. Let us be precise about what we know and what we do not know. We do not know that the objects in the Navy videos are of extraterrestrial origin. We do not know that David Grush's testimony is entirely accurate. We do not know what the objects observed by military personnel around the world actually are. What we know is this: trained military personnel using sophisticated instruments have repeatedly observed objects that perform maneuvers no known aircraft can perform. Governments in multiple countries have investigated these objects secretly for decades. Official intelligence assessments in France, the United Kingdom, and the United States have concluded that a residual category of cases cannot be explained by conventional means. A credentialed intelligence official has testified under oath before Congress about recovered non-human craft and biological material, and that testimony has gone without official refutation. This is not a fringe position. This is not late-night radio conspiracy. This is the state of the official record right now in the second decade of the 21st century. Something is in our skies. Something has been there for a long time. Something that the best pilots in the world, flying the most sophisticated aircraft ever built, cannot explain and cannot catch. And if something is in our skies now, capable of the performance characteristics documented in these encounters, what does that mean for all those ancient texts, all those cave paintings, all those descriptions of beings descending from the heavens in flying vehicles, teaching human civilizations everything they knew? What if those ancient people were not worshiping metaphors? What if they were describing real encounters in the only language they had with objects and beings that looked to them like the gods of the sky? What if the ancient gods and the modern unknowns are the same phenomenon, separated not by their nature, but only by the sophistication of our instruments for recording them? That is the connection this documentary has been building toward from its first words. We started in the ancient world. We stood at the foot of the Great Pyramid and asked why it was impossible. We read the clay tablets of Sumer and heard the voice of a civilization describing visitors from the sky. We looked at the Nazca lines and asked who they were drawn for. We found objects in geological strata so old they should not exist. We traced the orphan genes in your own DNA and found a story that evolution alone does not fully tell. And now we have arrived in the present, where the best trained military personnel in the world are watching objects move through the sky in ways that defy everything we know about physics and engineering. Where governments that spent decades saying there was nothing to see are now quietly, and then not so quietly, saying they were wrong. Where credentialed officials are testifying under oath about non-human technology and biological material. The question that began as fringe and became serious and is now becoming urgent is the same question it has always been. Who are they? Where did they come from? What do they want, and how long have they been watching? Let us step away for a moment from the radar tracking screens, the classified documents, and the physical artifacts. Let us set aside the relentless forensic question of evidence. We have spent hours tracing the physical footprints of the impossible across the sands of deep time, trying to prove what happened. But now, as the night deepens and the world outside your window grows quiet, let us turn our gaze inward. Let us sit in the quiet dark with what it would actually mean for humanity, for human history, for our religions, for our sciences, and for the fundamental way we understand ourselves if it were finally undeniably confirmed that intelligent extraterrestrial beings had visited Earth. The first and most immediate consequence of such a revelation is the absolute shattering of our cosmic isolation. It would mean with terrifying and beautiful finality that we are not alone, and that the universe is, in the most profound sense, inhabited. For all of our recorded history, humanity has felt like an orphan species wandering through a vast, dead, and uncaring mansion. We look up at the night sky and we see a terrifying emptiness. But confirmation changes the very texture of that night sky. It means that consciousness, the spark of self-awareness that we consider to be our most unique, precious, and fragile attribute, is not some miraculous, isolated accident confined forever to a single pale blue dot. Instead, consciousness is a recurring, fundamental feature of a living, thinking cosmos. Think of the libraries. Think of the museums. Confirmation would instantly and permanently rewrite history. Every ancient text carved into Mesopotamian clay, every myth whispered around prehistoric fires, every religious tradition from the Andes to the Himalayas that speaks of radiant beings descending from the heavens would have to be entirely re-examined. We could no longer comfortably dismiss them as the quaint superstitions of primitive minds trying to explain lightning or the changing of the seasons. We would be forced to reread them as potential eyewitness testimony. Yes, that testimony would be distorted by the passage of deep time and heavily constrained by the limits of pre-scientific language. But it would be pointing at something undeniably real. The winged chariots, the flaming shields in the sky, the gods who handed down the plow, and the mathematics of the stars. They would instantly transform from mythological poetry into historical record. It would challenge the institution of modern science, not by disproving the scientific method, but by radically deepening it. The discovery and confirmation of an advanced extraterrestrial technology would represent the most significant, paradigm-shifting scientific event in all of human history. Our current physics, which we treat as the ultimate ceiling of what is possible, would be revealed as merely the ground floor. It would be a sudden, violent expansion of what we know is possible, acting much like a single, brilliant candle suddenly illuminating a cavernous room that we had previously believed was completely dark and empty. And what of faith? What happens to the human soul when it meets the architects of the stars? It would undoubtedly shake religion to its core, but perhaps it would not destroy it. The truth is that many theologians and spiritual scholars have quietly grappled with this exact question for decades. The Vatican, for instance, maintains an official astronomer, and the Jesuit order has written extensively and seriously about the theological implications of encountering extraterrestrial intelligence. When we look closely with a newly opened mind, many of the world's great religious traditions already contain, embedded within their oldest texts, vivid accounts of non-human beings who came from above and interacted directly with humanity. In this light, the revelation of alien contact might not be the ultimate contradiction of faith. It might actually be its most startling physical confirmation. But once the initial shock of the revelation settles, it would raise a series of immediate, urgent, and deeply uncomfortable questions that would dominate human thought for centuries. Why did they come to this specific rocky planet in the first place? What did they want from us, or from our oceans, or from our minerals? Did they complete their mission and leave us to our own devices? Or far more unsettlingly, are they still watching? Are they observing us right now, studying our slow, painful progression the way a scientist studies a petri dish? Beneath all of these logistical, historical, and scientific questions lies the deepest, most terrifying question of all, the one that makes this subject not merely intellectually interesting, but existentially staggering. If beings vastly more advanced than us once visited this planet in our deep past, and if they had any hand in shaping our genetics, our evolution, or our earliest civilizations, then what are we, really? Are we their grand biological experiment, a species deliberately engineered to bridge the gap between primate and God? Are we a planetary terraforming project left to run its course over millennia? Are we their distant descendants, seated on a young, fertile world to preserve a dying lineage from a forgotten star system? Or are we simply their memory, a living, breathing monument to ancient visitors who passed through our solar system billions of years ago and decided to leave a fingerprint behind in the clay? Or perhaps there is a softer, more beautiful possibility hiding in the cosmic dark. Perhaps we are simply what happens when the universe slowly, inevitably becomes curious about itself. The cosmos is vast, and for eons it was silent and unobserved. Perhaps consciousness is the universe's way of opening its eyes, and perhaps the visitors who crossed the dark void to find us thousands of years ago were just the first time the universe looked back at itself. We began this documentary with a question that scientists are finally taking seriously. For hours, we have journeyed through the deep corridors of human history, looking closely at the shadows and the stones. We end it not with an answer, because there is no conclusive answer yet, but with something more valuable, a sharper, more honest version of the question. The evidence examined here does not prove that extraterrestrial beings visited Earth. What it proves, what it demonstrates beyond reasonable dismissal, is that human history contains anomalies. These are deep, persistent, cross-cultural anomalies that conventional explanations have not fully accounted for. Throughout this journey, we have stood before structures we cannot explain. We have traced the faint echoes of knowledge that appeared too early. We have listened to ancient traditions that describe the sky with a specificity that feels less like poetry and more like memory. When faced with such profound mysteries, the honest scientist looks at anomalies not with ridicule but with curiosity, because anomalies are where discovery lives. Every major scientific breakthrough began as something that didn't fit a datum, that refused to conform to the existing model, that kept showing up, that demanded a better explanation. Today, that demand for a better explanation is finally being met. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence is now finally being treated as legitimate science. High above our atmosphere, the James Webb Space Telescope is examining the atmospheres of exoplanets for biosignatures. Here on Earth, SETI continues listening. The Pentagon has created an official office dedicated to tracking UAP. Congress is holding hearings. Whistleblowers are emerging. Archives are being declassified. We are living, whether we realize it or not, in the opening chapter of the most significant investigation in human history, and perhaps the most important thing we can do as individuals, as a civilization, as a species still young enough to be surprised by the universe, is to stay open. Not credulous, not paranoid, but open. We must be willing to follow the evidence wherever it leads, even if it leads somewhere that fundamentally changes what we think we know about who we are and how we came to be. Because somewhere in the 13.8 billion year history of this universe, in a galaxy containing 400 billion stars, around a perfectly ordinary yellow sun, on a small blue planet covered in water, something happened that produced beings capable of asking the question, are we alone? The universe spent nearly 14 billion years building a creature that could wonder about it. When you look up at the infinite expanse of the night sky, it seems almost impossible to believe it only did that once. The door is open. The question is alive, and the search, the most human thing of all, continues. As the narrative of our ancient past and cosmic future comes to a close, let the immense, quiet reality of the universe wash over you. The stars do not rush. The planets do not hurry. You can simply let go, surrender to the gentle pull of cosmic gravity, and allow your mind to drift freely. Sleep now. Dream of the stars, and know that somewhere out there something may be dreaming too.